I'm Amber Mitchell, 29 years old, and I thought my wedding day would be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the moment I discovered what I was truly made of. My mother, my rock. I never imagined the people I was marrying into would reveal their true colors in front of 204 witnesses. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like and subscribe button, and get ready for a wedding story that didn't quite make it into the fairy tales. Growing up, it was just my mother Gail and me against the world. My father walked out when I was 3, leaving Mom to piece together our lives with nothing but determination and love. She never spoke ill of him, just quietly removed his photos and moved us forward. That's who my mother is, someone who faces life's challenges with quiet dignity. We weren't poor exactly, but we were always one emergency away from serious trouble. Mom worked as a waitress at a local diner during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. I still remember falling asleep to the smell of industrial cleaner that clung to her uniform when she'd come home and kiss me goodnight, often past midnight. Despite working 60-hour weeks, she never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. She'd arrive with dark circles under her eyes, but the brightest smile in the room. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you. Amber, she'd tell me while helping with homework, despite being exhausted. Those words became my mantra through high school as I studied late into the night, determined to earn scholarships. When my acceptance letter to State University arrived with a full academic scholarship, Mom cried harder than I'd ever seen. I was the first person in our family to attend college. College was a culture shock. Most of my classmates had parents funding their education, buying their textbooks, sending them spending money. I worked part-time at the campus bookstore and tutored on weekends while maintaining my GPA for the scholarship. It was during my junior year that I met Samantha, who became my best friend despite coming from a wealthy family. She never made me feel less than for shopping at thrift stores or skipping spring break trips I couldn't afford. After graduation, Samantha's father helped me land an interview at Taylor & Brooks Marketing, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. I worked harder than anyone else, determined to prove I belonged there despite not having the pedigree of most employees. By 26, I'd been promoted twice and earned the respect of my colleagues through sheer grit and talent. That's when Brandon Taylor walked into my life. As the son of Howard Taylor, one of the firm's founding partners, Brandon had everything I didn't: family connections, private school education, and a trust fund. He was brought in to head the digital marketing division where I worked. I initially resented him, assuming he'd gotten the position through nepotism rather than merit. I couldn't have been more wrong. Brandon proved himself brilliant, innovative, and surprisingly humble. He valued my input during meetings and often stayed late discussing campaign strategies. Unlike others with his background, he never name-dropped or flaunted his wealth. When he finally asked me to dinner after 3 months of working together, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our first date revealed how different our worlds were. He took me to an exclusive restaurant where the maitre d' greeted him by name. I panicked at the menu with no prices listed and ordered the cheapest-sounding dish I could identify. Brandon noticed my discomfort and suggested we leave. "This place is pretentious anyway," he said with a wink. "I know a fantastic taco truck by the river. Best food in the city, and they have picnic tables with a view." That night, eating street tacos and watching the city lights reflect on the water, I began falling for Brandon Taylor. He listened, really listened, as I told him about my childhood, my mother's sacrifices, my dreams for the future. When he drove me home to my modest apartment in the less fashionable part of town, he didn't hide his surprise, but didn't comment on it either. As our relationship progressed, the differences in our backgrounds became more apparent. Brandon's parents, Diane and Howard Taylor, lived in a mansion in the historic district. They belonged to the country club, attended charity galas, and vacationed in Europe. Meeting them for the first time was intimidating. "Just be yourself," Brandon assured me before dinner at their home. "They'll love you." But I noticed the way Diane's eyes narrowed slightly when I mentioned my mother's job. How Howard asked pointed questions about my people as though I were a different species. They were polite but cool, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. "Where did you summer as a child?" Diane asked over dessert. "I didn't really summer anywhere," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. Mom and I would sometimes spend a weekend at Lake Hartwell if she could get time off. "How quaint," she said, exchanging a look with Howard that made my stomach clench. Later, when Brandon drove me home, I expressed my concerns. "They're just old-fashioned," he said, taking my hand. "They'll warm up once they get to know you better." Over the next year, Brandon and I grew closer despite his parents' subtle disapproval. He stood up for me when it mattered. Like the time Howard suggested Brandon date Melissa Winters, the daughter of his golf buddy, instead of limiting his options. "Amber isn't an option, Dad," Brandon had said firmly. "She's the woman I love, and you'd better get used to it." When Brandon proposed on our 1-year anniversary, kneeling beside that same taco truck where we'd had our first real date, I said yes through happy tears. We agreed to a 1-year engagement, giving us time to plan the wedding and hopefully allowing his parents to fully accept our relationship. My mother was thrilled but nervous about meeting the Taylors. "I want to make a good impression," she said, buying a new dress that cost more than she usually spent on clothes for an entire season. The first meeting between our families was a disaster. We met at an upscale restaurant chosen by the Taylors. Mom arrived in her new dress, hair freshly done, looking beautiful but visibly uncomfortable. Diane greeted her with air kisses and immediately launched into stories about Brandon as a child, excluding Mom from the conversation. Howard barely acknowledged her existence, directing all his questions to me about wedding plans. "We'll handle everything, of course," Diane announced when the topic of wedding planning arose. "Howard and I insist on giving Brandon the wedding he deserves." I noticed my mother's face fall slightly before she composed herself. "That's very generous," she said softly. "I've been saving a little for Amber's wedding since she was born. I'd like to contribute too." Diane patted Mom's hand condescendingly. "That's sweet, Gail. But this will be quite an elaborate affair. We've already spoken to our planner about securing the country club. Perhaps you could handle something small, like the guest book?" I saw the hurt in my mother's eyes and felt a flare of anger, but Brandon squeezed my hand under the table. "Later." He promised me we'd find ways to include my mother meaningfully in the wedding plans. I wanted to believe him, but a sense of unease had taken root. Still, I loved Brandon. And I convinced myself that with time, our families would blend. I couldn't have been more wrong. The year of our engagement became an exercise in swallowing my pride. The Taylors insisted on paying for everything, a generosity that quickly revealed itself as control. Diane hired Valerie Harrington, the most exclusive wedding planner in the city. And our first meeting set the tone for what was to come. "We're thinking 200 guests," Diane announced as we sat in Valerie's sleek downtown office. "Actually, our list is around 100. I corrected gently. "We'd prefer something more intimate." Valerie and Diane exchanged looks. "Darling," Diane said, patting my hand. "There are certain obligations when you marry into a family like ours. Howard has business associates, club members, and family friends who simply must be invited." Brandon tried to intervene. "Mom, we want our wedding to reflect us, not Dad's business network. Your father has built relationships over decades that have provided the lifestyle you enjoy." "Brandon," Diane replied sharply. "Including his connections is non-negotiable." In the end, our guest list swelled to over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. My side consisted of 30 guests, my mother, a few relatives, college friends, and coworkers. The imbalance was just the beginning. When it came time to select the venue, I had dreamed of the botanical gardens where Brandon and I often spent Sunday afternoons. Diane dismissed it immediately. "The Taylor family has held every significant event at the Hillcrest Country Club for 3 generations, she declared. "The garden might make a nice setting for engagement photos, but it's hardly suitable for the wedding itself." My mother tried to support me during a venue tour of the country club. "The gardens here are lovely," she observed. "But the botanical gardens have those beautiful glass sculptures Amber loves so much." Diane barely acknowledged her comment. The club has just renovated their ballroom. The chandelier alone cost more than most people's entire weddings. I caught the slight and saw my mother flinch. Brandon was engaged in conversation with the club manager and missed the exchange entirely. That night, I expressed my frustrations to him. "Your mother constantly makes these little digs about money and status," I said. "It makes my mom feel terrible." Brandon sighed. "I know my mother can be tactless, but she means well." And I tried to focus on the fact that we were building a life together, not just planning a party. The menu tasting became another battleground. My mother had shyly suggested including a few Southern comfort food appetizers as a nod to our roots. Diane's expression could have curdled milk. "I don't think mini chicken and waffles quite match the sophistication we're aiming for," she said with a tight smile. "Let's stick with the chef's recommendations." The chef's recommendations were beautiful but pretentious, tiny portions of exotic ingredients arranged like art installations on oversized plates. I caught my mother looking at the food with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "Mom makes an amazing shrimp and grits," I told the chef. "It's been written up in the local paper. Is there any way we could incorporate something similar?" Before the chef could respond, Diane interjected. I found her outside, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry, honey," she said when she saw me. "I just feel so out of place. Maybe I should step back from the planning." "No," I said firmly. Every decision was filtered through their lens of wealth and status. My mother gradually stopped attending planning meetings, unable to bear Diane's constant dismissals. The breaking point came during dress shopping. I'd invited my mother, Diane, and my bridesmaids Jessica and Ashley. I had my heart set on a simple, dismissing my preferences as too plain or not special enough. She whispered. "It's certainly simple," Diane commented, circling me critically. "But don't you want something more dramatic? After all, this isn't a courthouse wedding." The implication was clear, and I saw my mother's face fall. Something inside me snapped. "Actually, I love this dress," I said firmly. "This is the one." "But darling, it doesn't make the statement a tailor bride should make," Diane insisted. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not becoming a tailor bride, Diane. I'm becoming Brandon's wife. And this is the dress I want." The bridal consultant, sensing the tension, quickly affirmed my choice. "It's absolutely perfect on you. Like it was made for your figure." Diane pressed her lips together disapprovingly, but didn't argue further. It was a small victory that cost me in other ways. The chill from the tailors intensified as the wedding approached. Howard began excluding Brandon from certain family events, and Diane's calls to check on wedding details became less frequent. Brandon noticed the shift. "They're just adjusting to not being in control," he assured me. "Once we're married, things will settle down." The evening before our wedding, the rehearsal dinner became a showcase of the growing divide. Held at an exclusive restaurant, the event was dominated by the tailor's friends and associates, never once mentioning me except as the woman who captured our son's heart. When it was my Uncle James's turn to speak on behalf of my family, Howard cut the microphone time short, claiming we needed to keep things moving along. That night, in my hotel room, I called Brandon in tears. "I don't think your parents will ever accept me or my family," I confessed. "They're set in their ways," he admitted, "but they'll come around. Tomorrow is about us, not them. I love you, Amber, and nothing will change that." I fell asleep clinging to that promise, hoping our wedding day would somehow bridge the chasm between our families. Instead, it would expose it for all to see. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day brides dream about. I woke in my luxury hotel suite, another gift from the tailors, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. My bridesmaids Jessica and Ashley arrived early, bringing coffee and pastries to fuel our getting ready session. "Today's the day," Jessica sang out, twirling in her robe. "Mrs. Amber Taylor. Coming right up." I smiled, pushing aside my lingering concerns. Today was about Brandon and me, not family drama. The hair and makeup team arrived, transforming the suite into a beauty salon. As the stylist worked on my hair, I texted my mother, making sure she was okay in her room down the hall. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she replied. "Just getting my hair done now." "Not a hair out of place." "I thought I'd check on how things are progressing," she announced, sweeping into the room and immediately beginning to inspect everything, the dress hanging on the closet door, the jewelry laid out on the dresser, even the makeup the artist was applying to my face. "The photographer will be here in 30 minutes, she informed me. "I've instructed him to take most of the formal portraits before the ceremony. Howard has a strict timeline for the reception." Jessica and Ashley exchanged glances. They'd witnessed enough of the wedding planning to understand the dynamics at play. "Actually," I said carefully, "I asked the photographer to capture some getting-ready moments with my mom first. She should be here any minute." Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we have a very full schedule. The Taylor family photos are priority, of course. We have 4 generations present today." Before I could respond, there was another knock. My mother entered, looking more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. She'd splurged on a professional styling, and her silver-streaked dark hair was swept into an elegant updo. Her dress, a soft blue that brought out her eyes, was simple but flattering. "Mom," I breathed, standing to embrace her. "You look amazing." "You think so?" she asked uncertainly. "It's not too simple?" "It's perfect," I assured her, blinking back tears that would ruin my freshly applied makeup. Diane cleared her throat. "Gail, that's a lovely color on you. Department store?" My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, Macy's had a sale." "How economical," Diane replied. "I always say one should buy what one can afford." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Jessica quickly intervened, suggesting we open the champagne. As we sipped from delicate flutes, my mother pulled a small box from her purse. "I have something for you," she said softly. "Something borrowed and blue." Inside was a delicate sapphire pendant on a silver chain. "It was my grandmother's," Mom explained. "She wore it at her wedding, and I wore it at mine." "I thought maybe." "It's beautiful," I whispered, genuinely touched. "Would you help me put it on?" Diane interjected. "We've already selected the jewelry to complement the dress. The Taylors have a diamond pendant that's been worn by every bride for the last 60 years. I'm sure we can incorporate both," I said firmly, turning so my mother could fasten her necklace around my throat. "This will be my something borrowed and blue, and I can add the Taylor pendant as well." Diane hovered in the background, occasionally suggesting poses or rearranging items in the frame. When we moved downstairs for the formal portraits, the tension escalated. I had only my mother, Uncle James, and 2 cousins. "This won't take long," Howard commented as the photographer arranged our small group. When the photographer suggested a photo of both sets of parents with the bride and groom, Diane smoothly positioned herself next to Brandon, relegating my mother to the far edge of the frame. "Perhaps Mrs. Mitchell should stand on the other side," the photographer suggested diplomatically. "Oh, but the lighting is better on this side," Diane countered. "And this is my good side." I caught Brandon's eye, silently pleading for support. He finally spoke up. "Mom, let's rearrange so both mothers are next to their children," he suggested, gently but firmly moving Diane to his other side and bringing my mother to stand beside me. The ceremony itself was beautiful despite the undercurrent of tension. As the string quartet played Canon in D, I walked down the aisle on Uncle James's arm, my eyes fixed on Brandon. His face as he watched me approach is something I'll never forget, pure love and wonder, as if nothing else in the room existed. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that marrying him was right, regardless of family complications. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. We exchanged traditional vows, our voices steady and sure. I caught sight of my mother in the front row, tears streaming down her face, her smile radiant with pride and joy. Several seats away, Diane dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her expression unreadable. The reception began with our first dance to, at last, Brandon twirling me around the dance floor as our guests applauded. For the father-daughter dance, Uncle James stepped in, holding me close as Ella Fitzgerald's "What a Wonderful World" played. I noticed Howard watching with an odd expression, not quite disapproval, but something adjacent to it. I found she'd been seated at a table far from the head table, with distant Taylor relatives who barely acknowledged her. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked, kneeling beside her chair. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she assured me, though I could see she wasn't. "Everything is beautiful. You've married a wonderful man. You should be at the head table with us," I insisted. She shook her head. "The place cards are already arranged. Don't make a fuss on your special day." Reluctantly, I returned to my seat between Brandon and Howard at the head table. Diane sat on Brandon's other side, already deep in conversation with the country club's director, who had stopped by to greet the family. As dinner progressed, I noticed fewer and fewer people visiting my mother's table. She sat there, eating quietly, occasionally speaking with my cousin Mike beside her, but largely isolated in a room full of people celebrating my marriage. The contrast between her solitude and the constant stream of well-wishers approaching the Taylors was stark and painful. Brandon noticed my distraction. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "My mom is all alone over there," I murmured. "Your parents have barely acknowledged her existence all day." He squeezed my hand. "We'll go sit with her after dinner, I promise." But as the dinner plates were cleared away, the moment for speeches arrived, and with it, the disaster I never saw coming. The reception was in full swing when the DJ announced it was time for toasts. Brandon's best man Kyle spoke first, delivering a charming speech full of college anecdotes and sincere wishes for our happiness. My maid of honor Jessica followed with a tearful tribute to our friendship and a warm welcome to Brandon as the newest addition to my life. Then Howard Taylor stood, commanding the room's attention with the ease of someone accustomed to power. Glass in hand, he approached the microphone with confidence. At first, his speech seemed perfectly appropriate, proud father congratulating his son, welcoming me to the family, expressing hope for our future together. But then came a subtle shift in his tone. "When Brandon first told us about Amber," Howard said, smiling tightly, "I'll admit we were surprised. She wasn't exactly from our usual social circle." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. "But she's proven herself to be quite adaptable." I felt Brandon stiffen beside me. Howard continued, his voice taking on a patronizing quality that made my skin crawl. "It's been interesting watching Amber navigate our world these past 2 years. Finding her sitting perfectly still, eyes fixed on her folded hands. We've had to explain certain things, of course," Howard continued. "The difference between salad and dessert forks. Which wines pair with which courses." "Dad," Brandon called out, a warning in his voice. Howard waved him off. "Just a bit of fun, son. No harm intended." Then Diane rose from her seat, taking the microphone from her husband with a practiced smile. "I think what Howard is trying to say is that we've enjoyed introducing Amber to our traditions. And me. Let me tell you about the first time I met Amber's mother," Diane continued, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Gail arrived at Le Bernardin, you know, that 5-star seafood restaurant downtown, wearing the most adorable polyester pantsuit." A few uncomfortable titters arose from the Taylors' friends. And when the sommelier presented the wine list, her eyes went so wide. Diane mimicked an exaggerated expression of shock. She asked if they had any sweet white Zinfandel at Le Bernardin. She laughed as though it was the most amusing anecdote. I felt physically ill. My mother had saved for weeks to buy that pantsuit specifically for that dinner. She'd been so proud of it, so nervous about making a good impression. And then, Diane continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing discomfort in the room, when the amuse-bouche arrived. She asked if they'd forgotten to bring the rest of the appetizer. Brandon started to rise, but Howard placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. I looked desperately toward Kyle, who seemed frozen in horror at what was unfolding. "But we shouldn't tease," Diane said, her tone making it clear she was doing exactly that. "Not everyone is fortunate enough to understand the finer things. Some people spend their lives serving others rather than being served. My mother's job." She was mocking my mother's job as a waitress and cleaning woman, the work that had put food on our table and clothes on my back. The work that had funded my school supplies and doctor visits when we had no insurance. I watched as my mother quietly stood and began making her way toward the exit, her dignity intact even as her shoulders curled inward protectively. "That's why we're so proud of Brandon for his charitable nature," Diane was saying. "Though I did tell him he could have just donated to a scholarship fund rather than marrying." "That's enough." The words exploded from me before I realized I was standing. The room went completely silent. Diane blinked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. It was the moment everything changed. The moment I found my voice. She hesitated before releasing it, her perfectly manicured fingers reluctantly uncurling from the handle. "Thank you for those illuminating remarks," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For those of you who don't know me well, which seems to include my new in-laws despite 2 years of family dinners, allow me to properly introduce myself and my mother." I took a deep breath, looking directly at Diane and Howard. "My name is Amber Mitchell-Taylor, and I am the daughter of Gail Mitchell, the strongest, most selfless person I have ever known." My voice grew stronger with each word. "My mother worked 2 jobs for 20 years to give me a chance at a better life. She went without new clothes so I could have school supplies. She skipped meals when money was tight so I would never go hungry. She cleaned other people's homes during the day and offices at night, often on her hands and knees, to pay for my dance lessons and science camp fees." I saw Brandon stand and move toward me, his face a mixture of pride and concern. Howard tried to intercept him, but Brandon firmly shook off his father's hand. "That polyester pantsuit you found so amusing, Diane? My mother saved for 3 months to buy it specifically to meet you. She wanted so badly to make a good impression on the parents of the man I love." A murmur ran through the crowd. Diane's face flushed red, while Howard looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "And yes, my mother doesn't know the difference between 15 types of wine glasses or which fork to use for the fish course. That's because she was too busy working to put food on our table to attend cotillion or sailing lessons." Brandon reached my side, taking my free hand in his. The gesture gave me courage to continue. "What my mother does know is dignity. Compassion. Genuine class, not the kind you buy with country club memberships and designer labels, but the kind that shows in how you treat others, especially those you consider beneath you." I locked eyes with Howard. "You mentioned being surprised that Brandon chose someone outside your social circle. Let me assure you, the feeling is mutual. I was equally surprised when I fell in love with someone from a family that measures a person's worth by their bank account rather than their character." Brandon took the microphone gently from my hand. "My wife is right," he said, the words "my wife" sending a ripple of whispers through the stunned audience. "I've witnessed the subtle and not-so-subtle ways my parents have demeaned Amber and her mother throughout our relationship. I've tried to address it privately. But perhaps public humiliation is the only language they understand." Howard stepped forward, his face thunderous. "You're making a scene at your own wedding. This is emotional overreaction." "No, Dad," Brandon interrupted firmly. "This is accountability. You and Mom have made countless derogatory comments about Amber's background from day one. You called her a gold digger when you thought I couldn't hear. You suggested I was slumming it when we started dating." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw several of the Taylors' friends exchange uncomfortable glances. "And tonight," Brandon continued, "you've insulted the woman who raised my wife to be the amazing person she is. In front of everyone we know. That's not something we can ignore or excuse." I scanned the room, finding my mother standing perfectly still, then walked slowly through the parting crowd to join us at the center of the room. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, feeling her tremble slightly. "This woman," I said. "I am prouder to be Gail Mitchell's daughter than I could ever be about any other association, including the one I just married into." Diane finally found her voice. "You're overreacting, Amber. We were just having a little fun with family differences." "If Gail is offended, I'm sorry she misunderstood the spirit of my comments." "That's not an apology," Brandon said coldly. "And we both know your jokes weren't made in good spirit." My mother gently took the microphone, surprising everyone, including me. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I don't need fancy things or social status to know my worth," she said simply. "And I raised my daughter to recognize that true respect isn't about what you own, but how you behave toward others." "I'm sorry you never learned that lesson, Diane." A smattering of applause broke out, led by Jessica and Ashley at a nearby table. It spread quickly, growing in volume until most of the room was clapping, many of them people I'd never met, Brandon's extended family and business associates who apparently recognized the truth when they heard it. Loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You can recognize that your behavior has been unacceptable and make genuine amends. Or you can continue as you have been and understand that will significantly limit your role in our lives going forward. He turned to address our guests. I apologize for this unexpected drama. Brandon led us from the ballroom into a private anteroom, leaving his stunned parents behind. As soon as the door closed, I collapsed into a chair, adrenaline draining from my body. I can't believe I just did that, I whispered. Brandon knelt before me, taking my hands. I've never been prouder to call you my wife. I'm so sorry it came to this. My mother stood uncertainly by the door. Maybe I should go. I don't want to ruin your wedding day any further. Absolutely not, Brandon and I said in unison. You're not going anywhere, Mom. For what it's worth, I heard a lot of people saying they were impressed by how you both handled it. Another knock, and Jessica and Ashley entered, faces flushed with indignation on my behalf. Those awful people, Jessica fumed. I can't believe they'd do that to you both on your wedding day. My mother surprised me by chuckling softly. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful, she said. So, what do we want to do now? It's our wedding. We can leave if you want, or go back out there and enjoy the party we planned. I considered for a moment, then straightened my shoulders. I say we go back out there and have the best damn reception ever. I'm not letting them ruin this day. That's my girl, my mother said proudly. We returned to the reception, heads held high. To my surprise, several guests I'd never met before approached to introduce themselves and express their support. Brandon's cousin Samantha hugged me tightly. We danced, cut the cake, and celebrated with those who chose to stay, about 3/4 of the original guest list. When we finally departed amid a shower of rose petals, I felt exhausted but strangely empowered. In our hotel suite, Brandon held me close. I'm sorry and I'm proud of you, all at once, he murmured against my hair. What happens now? I asked. With your parents? That depends on them, he replied. But whatever happens, we face it together. As I drifted towards sleep in my new husband's arms, I realized that our wedding day had become something unexpected, not just a celebration of our love, but a declaration of our values. And somehow, that seemed exactly right. The morning after our wedding, Brandon and I sat in our hotel suite, still processing the previous night's events. Sunlight streamed through the curtains as we shared room service coffee, both of us simultaneously exhausted and hyper-alert. I checked with the front desk, Brandon said, setting down his cup. My parents checked out around midnight. No message. I nodded, unsurprised but still hurt on his behalf. Are you okay? He considered the question carefully. Honestly, I'm disappointed but not shocked. They've never been good at confronting their own behavior. Our phones had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends and family. Some expressed shock, others offered support, and a few suggested we should have kept things civil for the sake of family harmony. Those last ones, I noticed, came exclusively from the Taylors' social circle. We decided to postpone our planned honeymoon to Bali. The idea of lounging on a beach thousands of miles away while this family earthquake was still sending aftershocks seemed wrong somehow. We need to be here, Brandon agreed when I suggested the delay. To deal with this directly, not run from it. I called my mother's room, and she joined us for breakfast. She looked tired but composed, sipping her tea with quiet dignity. I've been thinking, she said carefully. Maybe I should head home today. Give you two some space to figure things out with Brandon's parents. Absolutely not, I replied firmly. You've done nothing wrong, Mom. You shouldn't have to leave. Brandon nodded in agreement. Gail, your family. Our family. If anyone should make themselves scarce right now, it's my parents. My mother smiled faintly. I appreciate that. But this situation is complicated. And I don't want to make it harder for either of you. Before we could argue further, Brandon's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. It's my father. He put the call on speaker. Howard's voice filled the room, stiff and formal. Brandon, your mother, and I would like to speak with you and Amber. Today, if possible. Brandon met my eyes, silently questioning. I nodded. We can meet at 3, Brandon replied coolly. But I want to be clear, if this is just an attempt to minimize what happened or make excuses, we're not interested. There was a long pause before Howard responded. Understood. Our house at 3, then. After he hung up, the 3 of us sat in silence for a moment. I should definitely go home. They need to do it to your face. Brandon nodded firmly. Amber's right. My parents need to apologize to you directly, Gail. No representatives, no proxies. My mother looked uncertain, but didn't argue further. We spent the morning with Samantha and Mike, our closest friends who had stayed overnight at the hotel. They provided a welcome distraction, helping us sort through gift envelopes and sharing their observations from the reception aftermath. You should have seen Diane's face when you took that microphone, Samantha said. The imposing colonial-style home had always intimidated me with its perfect landscaping and museum-quality furnishings. Today, it just looked like an expensive house occupied by flawed people. Howard opened the door himself, unusual, as they typically had staff for that, and led us silently to the formal living room. Diane sat perched on an antique settee, her posture rigid. Eyes reddened, but makeup flawless. She visibly stiffened when she saw my mother. I didn't realize Gail would be joining us, she said, her voice strained. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Brandon replied evenly. You've never really realized Gail at all. You've looked past her, through her, but never actually at her. Howard cleared his throat. Let's all sit down. An uncomfortable silence settled over us as we arranged ourselves, Brandon and I on one sofa, my mother in an armchair, the Taylors opposite us like adversaries at a negotiation table. What happened last night was regrettable, Howard began in his boardroom voice. Regrettable doesn't begin to cover it, Brandon interrupted. You and Mom publicly humiliated Gail at our wedding. You mocked her background, her job, everything about her. Diane's face flushed. We were just making conversation. If people took it the wrong way. There was no wrong way to take it, I cut in. You deliberately mocked my mother for not being wealthy or socially connected. Every job has dignity if it's done with integrity. Howard shifted uncomfortably. No one is saying hard work isn't admirable. We've built our own success. From the foundation of generational wealth and connections, Brandon finished. Dad. Her voice gentle but firm. This is about basic human respect. Something you wouldn't extend to me because you decided my worth based on my bank account and address. What I care about is my daughter's happiness. Brandon makes her happy. I had hoped his family would treat her with the respect she deserves. But you've made it clear that her background makes her somehow less worthy in your eyes. Tears welled in my eyes at my mother's quiet strength. Brandon squeezed my hand. You have 2 choices. He told his parents. You can acknowledge the harm you've caused and commit to genuine change, or you can maintain your position and accept that it will severely limit your role in our lives. Howard looked genuinely distressed. You'd cut us off? Over some thoughtless comments? Not just comments, Brandon replied. Over a pattern of behavior that has made it clear you don't respect my wife or her family. And yes, if that pattern continues, we will distance ourselves accordingly. The gravity of the situation finally seemed to penetrate. Diane's carefully composed facade crumbled as tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't want to lose you, she whispered to Brandon. When he turned around, he looked older somehow, the confident businessman replaced by an uncertain father. We were wrong, he said simply. Our behavior was inexcusable. Diane dabbed at her tears with a tissue. I never thought of myself as elitist. But hearing how my words affected you. She looked directly at my mother for perhaps the first time. Gail. I am truly sorry. My behavior was cruel and unnecessary. My mother nodded acknowledgement, but didn't immediately accept the apology. Words are easy. It's consistent actions that matter. You're right, Howard said, surprising us all. We need to demonstrate that we understand how inappropriate our behavior has been. He looked at Brandon. But this isn't fixed with one conversation or one therapy session. This requires real change. We understand, Howard said solemnly. As we prepared to leave, Diane approached my mother hesitantly. But I also believe in protecting myself and my daughter from harm. Show me you've changed, and forgiveness will follow naturally. In the car afterward, a weight seemed to have lifted. Nothing was fully resolved, but at least everything was now in the open. I'm proud of both of you, Brandon said, glancing between my mother and me. What happens now? I asked. Now we go home. We decided to take a shorter trip to a nearby coastal town and invited my mother to join us for the first few days before continuing on our own. Are you sure? She asked when we called with the invitation. That's your private time. We're sure, I confirmed. After everything that's happened. The most important moments in life aren't the ones we carefully orchestrate, but the ones where we're forced to stand up for what matters most. 6 months after our wedding, Brandon and I hosted a dinner party in our new home, a comfortable townhouse halfway between my mother's neighborhood and the Taylors' part of town. The symbolic location wasn't lost on anyone. I surveyed our dining room with satisfaction. The table was set with a mixture of items: my mother's hand-embroidered tablecloth, wedding gift china from the Taylors, and colorful serving dishes Brandon and I had picked out together. Different worlds, blending more harmoniously than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. The doorbell rang, and my mother arrived first, carrying a homemade apple pie. She looked different these days, more confident, her clothes newer but still reflecting her simple, elegant taste. Since the wedding, she'd reduced her cleaning jobs to part-time, accepting Brandon's and my offer to help with her finances without allowing us to completely support her. I still need to work, she'd insisted. It's part of who I am. Brandon greeted her with a warm hug. Gail, that pie smells amazing. Family recipe, she replied with a smile. Cost of ingredients, about $10. Worth, priceless. Her little jokes about money were her way of reclaiming the narrative, transforming past pain into something lighter. I loved her for it. The doorbell rang again. Brandon and I exchanged glances before he went to answer it. Diane and Howard entered, bearing a bottle of wine and a floral arrangement. These are lovely, I said, accepting the flowers. It was a small thing, but significant, Diane making an effort to honor my preferences rather than defaulting to her own. One of many small changes we'd observed over the past months. The family counseling Howard had suggested had actually happened, weekly sessions with Dr. Harrington, a no-nonsense therapist who didn't let anyone hide behind social niceties or deflections. Those first few sessions had been brutal, with long-suppressed feelings erupting like geysers. But gradually, something shifted. Howard was the first to truly break. Country club fixture revealed that his polished exterior had been built atop a foundation of childhood shame and deprivation. When I finally climbed out of that life, I swore I'd never go back. I'd never let anyone see that version of me again. His eyes had filled with tears as he looked at my mother. When I look at you, Gail, and hear about your struggles, it brings it all back. The fear, the shame. It's easier to push you away than to remember. That revelation didn't instantly heal everything, but it cracked open a door to understanding. Diane, too, eventually shared her own insecurities, how her family's money had been her only perceived value growing up, how she'd been trained to judge others by their social standing because she'd always been judged the same way. Now, 6 months later, we sat around our dining table, not perfect, not entirely comfortable, but genuinely trying. Howard asked my mother about her week and listened, actually listened, to her response. Diane complimented the tablecloth and seemed genuinely interested when Mom explained it had been a project during night classes at community college years ago. I've always wanted to learn embroidery, Diane admitted. But it seems so. I don't know. My mother said it wasn't something our kind of people spent time on. I could teach you. My mother offered. It's not difficult, just requires patience. I'd like that, Diane said, and I believed she meant it. After dinner, Brandon clinked his glass for attention. We have some news to share. I took his hand, heart fluttering with excitement. I'm pregnant. We're due in early spring. The reactions were everything we'd hoped for. My mother's hands flew to her face, tears instantly welling in her eyes. A baby? Oh, sweetheart. Howard's face lit up in a genuine smile, while Diane actually squealed with delight. The grandparents-to-be looked at each other, momentarily united in joy. This calls for a proper toast, Howard said, raising his glass. To new life and new beginnings. Later, as we cleaned up together, all of us, the Taylors included, despite Diane's initial uncertainty about dishwashing techniques, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. Penny for your thoughts, my mother said, bumping me gently with her hip as we loaded the dishwasher. Just thinking about the wedding, I admitted. Part of me wanted to disappear. But another part thought, my daughter deserves better than this. I deserve better than this. You absolutely did, I agreed. The old me would have just taken it. She continued. Would have smiled and swallowed the hurt to keep the peace. But watching you stand up there, refusing to accept their treatment of us, it changed something in me too. And that's all anyone can ask. Not perfection, just genuine effort. 2 weeks later, Diane called my mother directly, a first, to invite her to lunch. I thought we could look at baby things. She suggested tentatively. And maybe you could tell me more about those embroidery lessons. When they returned from their outing, both women were laughing. I've commissioned one with sunflowers, Diane added, since they're special to Amber. The following weekend, we received a package from Howard, a beautiful handcrafted wooden cradle. The note attached read simply, I made this myself. The first thing I've built with my hands since high school woodshop. Imperfect, like me, but made with love. Howard. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of tension, old habits resurfacing, misunderstandings that needed to be addressed. But the foundation had shifted. Respect had replaced contempt. But I wanted you to have it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Not ostentatiously expensive, but clearly chosen with care. Look at the charm, Diane urged. My mother examined it closely, a tiny silver sunflower. It's lovely, she said, genuinely touched. I know jewelry can't make up for how I treated you, Diane said, her usual polish giving way to raw sincerity. But I want you to know I see you now, Gail. I see your strength, your dignity, your love for Amber. I was blind to it before because I was so caught up in superficial things. My mother's eyes glistened as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. Thank you, Diane. That means more than the gift itself. As spring approached and my due date with it, the two grandmothers-to-be began planning a baby shower together. We were thinking of a sunflower theme, they told me in unison, then laughed at the coincidence. On the afternoon of the shower, as I surveyed the beautifully decorated room, sunflowers everywhere, Brandon came up behind me, wrapping his arms around us both. Happy? More than I could have imagined, I replied honestly. Not because everything's perfect, but because everything's real. Across the room, my mother and Diane were greeting guests together, no awkwardness or power dynamic visible between them. Howard was earnestly explaining his plans for building a treehouse to my Uncle James, who was offering practical construction advice. The journey from that wedding day confrontation to this moment hadn't been easy. It had required courage, honesty, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. It had demanded that all of us examine our own prejudices and insecurities. But the result was a family being reborn, just in time to welcome its newest member. That night, after all the guests had gone, I sat alone in the nursery, rocking gently in the chair Howard had built to match the cradle. Above me hung the sunflower mobile. And on the wall was a framed embroidery my mother and Diane had created together, my name intertwined with Brandon's, with our daughter's name in the center, Grace. Grace. The ability to extend kindness where it hasn't been earned. The courage to begin again after hurt. The wisdom to see beyond surface differences to the humanity beneath. Even when our voices shake. And sometimes, the family we build is even stronger than the one we're born into, not despite the challenges, but because of how we face them together. Have you ever had to stand up to protect someone you love, even when it was difficult? Or found yourself bridging two worlds that seemed impossibly different? Share your story in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true strength isn't about status or power, but about the courage to remain authentic in a world that often values the wrong things.